Hi, welcome to Hidden Gems. We're going to talk about books that should have been hits. My name's Allison, and I am an advisory librarian with the district.
Hi there, I'm Julie Luplo, and I'm a collection librarian with Arapahoe Libraries. And I'm excited to tell you that the books we're talking about today, many of them we added in print and also on digital. So hopefully, after you hear about these, you should be able to get your hands on these books as soon as possible.
Hi, I'm Julia Schmidt, and I'm one of the library's copy catalogers, and I can attest to many of these books already coming in and getting to catalog them, and several more on their way. So
Great. I can't wait. I'm Pamela, and I am an adult advisory librarian with lots of book clubs and lots of book ideas.
And I'm Keegan, and I'm a reference librarian at Coble Library.
All right, so let's get started. And I'm up first. So this is The Last Days of Cafe Layla by Danya Bajan. It came out in 2017, and it's kind of historical fiction up to contemporary. The main character is Zad, who's a wonderful man who runs Cafe Layla in a neighborhood in Tehran. During the Iranian Revolution, he sends his children to the US for their education and to get them out of the country, knowing he might never see them again. But years later, his daughter is able to return to Iran and brings her daughter with her. And the two of them are confronted by a very different world than their home in California. Every character in this book is so well drawn and so, well, maybe not always likable. Zod is likable always, but the character that really stands out is the cafe itself. It witnesses history as it goes from being an upscale restaurant with opera singers to being a small neighborhood cafe to basically being a soup kitchen for people with nothing. The cafe always remains at the center of family and neighborhood.
okay, I'm so excited to talk about this one. I loved this. It's The Brilliant Life of Eudora Honeysett. And I'd say it's a cross between A Man Called Uva and Remarkably Bright Creatures. This book was one that I absolutely love, recommend often, and yet never really hear people talking about, so I had to share. Eudora Honeysett is an 85-year-old woman who has lived a long and rather tough life. She is ready for death and awaits it without fear. That is until she meets the likes of a new 10-year-old neighbor, Rose. Rose is sunshine and silliness, all wrapped up in a rainbow, sparkle, and unicorn-themed outfit. Eudora and Rose not only build a friendship with one another, but also with the likes of a friendly widower, a cat, a death doula, a new baby sister. It becomes an adorable motley crew of unlikely friends. This is a story about enjoying life for every second of time that one is given and letting go of the past that cannot be changed. While some of the dialogue is a little cheesy at times, it was kind and encouraging, and I loved it. And that is The Brilliant Life of Eudora Honeysett.
Sounds so good.
I just added that to my list.
Exactly.
All right, The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell. Oh, when you read a great book, you can remember often where, when, and how it made you feel. I can recall exactly where I was when I read this book, and thus I knew it would make my list. This is a 2018 publication by Robert Dugoni. You might know him from his mystery fiction and series, but this is quite a departure. Sam Hill, Hill, was born with a genetic condition. It makes his irises appear red, and it's a condition known as ocular albinism. This led to nicknames in school like Devil Boy. The taunting continued, but Sam persevered. He had a wise father, a very faithful mother. See, she believed that this condition was a miracle from above, and he had two misfit friends that were there for him. We follow Sam in this coming-of-age story through his school years, through tragedies and difficulties, into high school, and through changes in his family life. 40 years later, we meet Sam again, a small-town eye doctor who sets off on a journey that will take him halfway across the world. This time, his eyes will allow him to see what truly matters. The author was inspired to write this novel after he read a true story about a boy with red eyes who was denied admission into a school in Australia. However, the author also notes that it was growing up with a younger brother with Down syndrome who also faced discrimination that was a motivation for this title. Interesting to note, Hollywood has indeed purchased the screenplay and this is being made into a major motion picture.
Oh, great, Julie. I'm glad to hear that. We talked about the Sam Hill at a book club, and we had such a great conversation. There's a lot to talk about. And so now here's my first book, Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstance by Ruth Emmy Lang. I read and loved this debut novel when it first came out in 2017. It's the story of Waylon Gray, who was raised by wolves, and he slowly comes to realize that he has unusual powers, especially when he stopped a tornado heading toward a town in Oklahoma on Christmas Day. He has to move often, though, as various townspeople start to be suspicious of his activities, and so then he moves on. At one point, Waylon saves a young girl named Mary from an angry wolf, and they become good friends. She doesn't care that he might be a danger to her and indeed to himself. This is a perfect book for readers who would like to dip a toe into science fiction or who don't think of themselves as sci-fi readers, as really it's a beautifully written book about nature, love, wonder, and accepting yourself. Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstance.
Well, speaking of sci-fi, I will
Yes,
follow
ma'am.
up with The Humans by Matt Haig. You may recognize Matt Haig's name as the author of the ever-popular Midnight Library. However, back in 2013, The Humans was published. This book asks some amazing questions and makes some humorous observations that really made the gears in my brain start turning. Some of those questions are, what if there are aliens somewhere in the outer reaches of space? And what if those aliens are keeping tabs on the human race on Earth to make sure we don't advance beyond a certain point? What if they can insert themselves onto our planet to erase any progress that would take us beyond their point of comfort? What if one of them comes to Earth and is at first disguised, but ends up falling in love with us? Through the eyes of an alien posing as Professor Andrew Martin, there is great commentary on the ugly, the silly, and the innately beautiful things about humans. I found myself laughing out loud frequently, but also opening my eyes even further to the amazing world around me and the people who inhabit it.
This is one of the best books ever. It's a great book. So much
Oh.
to think about.
All right. So my next book is Purple Swamp Hen by Penelope Lively. Came out in 2017. Lively is the author of Moon Tiger, which won the Booker Prize way back in 1987. And she wrote this collection of short stories when she was in her early 80s. I don't often read short stories, but when I do, sometimes I love them. And I was really delighted by these, especially on audio. They're all narrated by Davina Porter, who narrates the Outlander books, and she does a wonderful job. My favorite story and the title one is The Purple Swamp Hen. And it's narrated by the Purple Swamp Hen, who lives in a garden of a villa in Pompeii. The villa is owned by, let's call them, a morally degenerate family. And this Purple Swamp Hen has witnessed it all and has some comments about their lives. But the worst is yet to come in Pompeii, but the Purple Swamp Hen can fly away and survive to tell her story of her life in Pompeii. Amazing range of stories.
And again, I'm interrupting, Allison, but we one of my book clubs discussed it, and we don't usually do well discussing a book of short stories, and we all love this book, especially The Purple Swamp Hen. Yes.
Okay, so my next one is something new, Tales from a Makeshift Bride. And when I first started working at the library, I had never read a graphic novel, I will confess. And then my coworker recommended this one by Lisa Knisley, and I realized I loved the graphic novel style. This is a memoir, which is the story of how Knisley got back together with her boyfriend, John, got engaged, and planned their wedding. This book was especially fun for me at the time because I was also planning my wedding. She's a creative through and through, and Knisley is determined to make her and John's wedding detailed, personal, and handmade. From building a barn to get married in, yes, they actually built a barn, to sewing her own veil, Knisley throws herself fully into wedding planning. and she is fueled by determination to utilize her artistic skills and by her ever-present skepticism of the institution of marriage. She navigates all the wedding chaos to finally say, I do. This read is funny and heartfelt and with beautiful illustrations. While other works by Knisely, such as Relish, about her love of food, have received recognition, this is one of hers that feels like a hidden gem for the wedding lover and marriage skeptic alike. And that's Something New by Lucy Knisely.
Sounds like it would be a good engagement gift for many people.
Oh,
It was super fun. I actually had this written down at one point, but it reminded me what to bring when I got my marriage license. So it's informational too.
that's good. Oh, if you are looking, I tell you, for an uplifting, true story of the good that exists in our world, you don't need to look any further than The Day the World Came to Town, 9/11 in Gander, Newfoundland. This was published 1 year after the attacks. This was September 2002. This is the remarkable true story of Gander in Canada and how this small island of only 10,000 people welcomed and housed nearly 7,000 when 42 planes were diverted there. Many of those traveling on the planes had been en route for 24 plus hours. They were tired, hungry. You could imagine how scared and alone they were feeling. And yet the people of Gander, Newfoundland opened their homes. They prepared food. Shelters were established. Schools were open so people could shower. They could use computers to connect with loved ones. This is fun. Local bus drivers that had been on strike, they crossed the picket lines to transport these passengers to different shelters set up all around the island in schools and churches. For 4 days, these people served others in ways that truly inspired me. All the while, we were privy to learning the stories of the passengers and how their travels landed them there. A couple adopting a daughter in Kazakhstan, a couple on vacation in Ireland, a family of Russian immigrants looking to start a new life in Seattle. The author, journalist Jim DeFeed, he moved to Gander for 2 months right after 9/11 to research this. And Gander International Airport, interestingly enough, is still a preferred emergency landing point for aircraft that are facing onboard medical or security issues. Who knew? As a show of thanks, a scholarship fund was established for the children of Gander, and it was formed to even provide new computers for their schools. You also might know about this story from the Broadway musical Come From Away.
Great book. That was a great book. Leonard and Hungry Paul. This was my favorite book of 2019, well over 5 stars. I guess I can only give it 5, but wow, great book. This is the story of 2 30-something friends trying to find their place in the world. Leonard has lost his mother, and the house is now too quiet without her. Hungry Paul lives at home and plays board games with his family and his friend Leonard. Things start to change for these 2 quiet and kind men when Leonard becomes interested in a woman at work, and Hungry Paul receives an unexpected windfall. Will they find their place in the world? Can quiet, kind people make an impact? The writing is lovely with humor and warmth, and this book made me smile on nearly every page. We all need more people like Leonard and Hungry Paul in our lives.
I love that cover and the Scrabble pieces. That's great.
Yeah. I love the way it looks here where it says Leonard and Pamela. And then you see Hungry Paul. Okay, take the case.
My next pick is Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Rowanhorse. Trail of Lightning is the start of a wonderful Native American dystopian story. There was a great flood that wiped out much of America and a lot of the people who lived there. This story takes place in Dineta, which is formerly the Navajo Reservation, which actually survived the flood. Readers follow Maggie, who is a monster hunter and supernaturally gifted killer. She's trying to leave her past behind her, but the job she's currently being asked to accomplish, find a missing girl who was taken by a monster, is pulling up a lot of memories. Maggie can't do the job alone and unenthusiastically gets help from a reluctant medicine man named Kai, who has some secrets of his own. This is an interesting dystopian world in which Native American gods and monsters walk the earth, and humans are doing everything they can to live as normal lives as they possibly can in their new climate. It also has a strong female protagonist who has to face her demons and the reasons she tries to distance herself from others through her interactions with a comical male sidekick who is hiding his own demons behind humor.
Oh, me. Bruno, Chief of Police, is the first in a mystery series written by Martin Walker. This one came out in 2009. It is set in a small village in France. Bruno is happy to relax as the chief of police and only police officer in this tiny, peaceful town after a long and busy army career. He spends his day strolling around the town, chatting with people. All his energy goes into his garden, searching for the best food and wines and cooking perfect meals. The food descriptions alone are enough to read this book. Forget the mystery. Just do it for the food. It's unbelievable. But there is a mystery. A North African man who served in the French army is murdered. And as Bruno goes through with the investigation with some help from larger towns, of course, the people in the town must grapple with their beliefs. Is he North African or is he French if he served in the French army and currently lives in France? Does his race matter? Does his religion matter? And it fractures the town. And it's up to Bruno to not only help solve the case, but to reunite the town and their trust in each other. It's a delightful series, and the audiobooks are particularly good.
Love a good audiobook. Okay, my next one is The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. For fantasy lovers, this series has been hailed as fantasy as it ought to be written by J.R.R. Martin and as an incredible series by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Despite the high praise, I rarely hear about this book series and would consider it a major hidden gem. This is the story of Fitz, a bastard of King Chivalry Farseer who must try to find his place in the world. While he possesses a magical link to animals called the wit, Fitz must forego this misjudged and often perilous magic as he's finally welcomed into the royal household he was previously cast out from. Now Fitz must continue to fight against the prejudices of his birth, give up his use of the wit, and train to become an assassin for the king. With characters whose names are based off the virtues they embody, this slow burn fantasy builds characters that readers will come to admire, hate, and invest in. The world is richly described, and the conflicts make enemies of those both far away and close to home. Readers journey with it through weaponry training, forbidden friendships, and the courtly implications of his blood name, chivalry. This book is like Lord of the Rings in its detailed writing style and world building, with similarities to Wheel of Time for the long haul saga feel. For those who love a fantasy world that they can easily disappear into for a while, Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb is a great read.
And it's only book one, right?
It is. So it's a trilogy, and then there's like multiple other trilogies that all go and exist in this world.
Well, that's going on my TBR.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I love that we are highlighting so many different genres, and this is just great. So my next book, a 2015 book, Inside the O'Briens. You may know Lisa Genova. She is a PhD in neuroscience from Harvard University. She brought us the book Still Alice, and that book, it raised awareness of Alzheimer's. Well, now Inside the O'Briens takes a look at Huntington's disease. Joe O'Brien is a 44-year-old Boston police officer. He lives in the Irish Catholic neighborhood of Charlestown, Massachusetts. Uniquely, I found out yesterday, the oldest neighborhood in Boston. And he's the father of 4 young adults. They're all in their 20s. Joe starts to get some weird symptoms, some temper flares, some difficulty concentrating, clumsiness, and he thinks, gosh, I'm just working long days. It's just taking its toll on me. And yet it gets worse. And he finds himself at a neurologist's office, and he learns he has Huntington's disease, which is an inherited disorder that causes nerve cells in parts of the brain to gradually break down and die. And unfortunately, there is no cure. Joe's kids then learn they have a 50% chance of inheriting this same disease. So they're then forced to decide, do we get tested? Especially Joe's 21-year-old daughter, Katie. She's struggling. Does she want to know? Can she live with the constant anxiety of not knowing? I read this book and it had me pondering and even discussing with loved ones, what would I do if I had that 50-50 chance? Would I want to know? And how would I live my life differently if I did? Inside the O'Briens.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. Dancing in the Mosque by Homera Kaderi is a heartbreaking memoir by a mother who had to say goodbye to her son after she left her husband, who was a member of the Taliban. As a young girl, Homera went to school, learning to read and write, and later she taught other girls. She met her husband in their mosque while she was dancing, telling him that it was a punishment for things she had done wrong. The couple marry and expected to enjoy what passed for normal life in Afghanistan, but then her husband came under the influence of the Taliban. When Homera became pregnant, her big belly under her burqa was viewed suspiciously, and she was almost shot on her way to the hospital. She struggled under the misogynistic social order and finally knew she had to escape. But her husband would not let her take their son, and in fact said she could have no further contact with him. She wrote this book so that her son might understand his absent mother and what had driven her to leaving. It's about motherhood, sacrifice, and survival. Her story asks you to consider the lengths you would go to protect yourself, your family, and your dignity. It was heartbreaking and very inspiring.
Oh, wow. I think you have us all a little crying a bit. Oh, and now.
And now for something different.
Keegan, take us away.
So my next pick is Harleen by Stepan Shage. Harley Quinn is probably one of the most popular and recognizable DC Comics villain names. But before she was a villain, she was a psychiatrist named Dr. Harleen Quinzel. Dr. Quinzel thought she had a potential cure for the madness that plagues Gotham City. In order to test her theory, she got permission to interview the disturbed minds of some of the most dangerous patients at Arkham Asylum. Then she starts to find herself drawn to the most notorious inmate, the Joker. He warps her mind and helps her become his Harlequin partner, Harley Quinn. This graphic novel tells this tale and a little beyond with some of the most amazing artwork that will make you want to analyze each cell's detail and long for more. This has become my favorite Harley Quinn story that I've come across because the visuals are just stunning and I cannot recommend it enough.
I'm just staring into her eyes. Okay. So Buttermilk Graffiti by Edward Lee is a nonfiction book that came out in 2019. Lee is a Korean-American chef who has a restaurant. He's originally from New York, but he has a restaurant in Kentucky now. And he undertook a 2-year cross-country trip to visit immigrant communities across the country to sample food, visit restaurants, interview people about eating. And the result is part travelogue, part cooking lessons, but mainly just great storytelling about these communities. They range from Vietnamese, Cambodian, Muslim American, Germans. And there's a lot of discussion about what does it mean for food to be authentic? If they start incorporating local ingredients, does that make it less authentic? But maybe it makes it better. And there's a lot of conversation about that type of thing. What happens? Does the food become, is it more American food then? Or is it just better food or worse food and things? The whole book is a testament to food and to being open to embracing new tastes and finding community wherever you are. You will also marvel at this man's ability to eat like 3 different entrees at every restaurant and still be able to walk. Really great on audio or as a book, and a great book club choice.
I love the books that
Are
talk
there
about
recipes?
food.
Yeah, are there recipes,
There
Allison?
are recipes, but they're pretty complicated because they're fusion recipes of like a Cambodian dish, but with he brings some of his own Korean things in. And so I enjoyed looking at the recipes, but did not actually attempt any myself.
That's awesome.
Maybe for the braver cook.
Okay, so I am going to talk about Ghosts by Dolly Alderton, which is a 2020 fiction book that I hear people mention, but not as often as I feel like they should. This one was sitting on my TBR or to be read pile for a long time before I finally picked it up and realized what a gem of a book it is. A London food writer in her 30s, Nina goes through life with an observing eye and a sharp sense of wit. She's surrounded by friends in varying life stages, single, married, new parents, and learns that being a woman in your 30s can be a confusing place to exist. I thought this Bridget Jones-ish character wouldn't be my favorite, but Alderton managed to give Nina a lot more depth than I initially expected. Nina's character feels honest and mostly content with her life, which is refreshing. I appreciated her ability to balance the dichotomy of her feelings too. She longs for things, but hasn't grown bitter while waiting for them. She fights against societal norms, yet is honest when she craves certain traditions. She gets frustrated at her friends' selfishness, yet admires the beautiful lives they've created for themselves. Nina also must navigate caring for an aging parent. She has so many thoughtful words as she contemplates the hand in life she's been dealt, and that is Ghosts.
Oh, look at this beautiful cover. Oh, Molokai. This is a 2003 book from Alan BRENNERT. Another sign of a great book is maybe you hear about it in your many circles of life, but for whatever reason, you just decide not to pick it up. Well, that is until your book club discovers it and chooses it. And so in 2020, I was able to read Molokai. Little known time in history for me. This is the 1890s in Honolulu. I knew of the island of Molokai from trips to Hawaii, but not necessarily the history. This is the time of leprosy or Hansen's disease, and those afflicted were quarantined to this island. People would watch for those discolored patches of skin, and while this is a fictional account, this absolutely did occur, and families were split up. Rachel Kalama is our 7-year-old main character in this one. She's removed from her family's home when it's discovered she has leprosy. Can you imagine 7 years old being forcibly removed from your home and taken to a leper colony of Kaulupapa on this island of Molokai? Others there quarantined with her become her pseudo family, and these relationships become so endearing and meaningful. The Franciscan nun who cares for her, her adopted auntie, the native healer. I found myself enamored by the world that they created on the island, and I really cared about the future and the plight of these patients. This historical fiction book is so beautifully written, and after you fall in love with Molokai, this book, you'll be pleased to know that there's a follow-up book, The Daughter of Molokai, written in 2019. In one interview about this book, the author said, "It may sound like a depressing subject for a novel, and I don't shy away from portraying the darkness inherent in it, but the story of the people of Kaulupapa is actually one of transcendence over circumstance, of a people who were taken from their lives and families, and they were expected to die, but they chose life, even in the face of death." Molokai.
Sounds so good.
Claire Keegan, Small Things Like These. This is another lovely book in the fine tradition of Irish authors, and you can perhaps see on the cover that it did win the Booker Prize last year. So it's not a big novel. In fact, at 118 pages, it's really just a novella. Set in a small Irish town in 1985, Bill Furlong is a coal merchant. He regularly delivers coal to the nearby convent in the town, and one morning discovers a young woman, obviously pregnant, crying and hiding in the shed. He reaches out, attempting to help her, although he's not really sure of his place in this obvious drama of what's going on here at the convent. It's a quiet but very impactful story of a small town, silences, and the power of the Catholic Church in Ireland. It's a very timely and thought-provoking read, told in few but beautiful words, every word chosen very carefully. I do hope Claire Keegan herself will get more reading, more people will read her. And I think Julie and I are going to create a book club kit of this book for our book clubs
We
to
are.
read and discuss. Great, thank you. It was just a beautiful story. Thank you very much.
All right. My last pick is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson has become quite a large name in the fantasy genre. He was nominated to finish the Wheel of Time series after Robert Jordan passed and became the most funded Kickstarter of all time in 2022 for what he dubbed the Year of Sanderson 2023, after he announced he wrote 4 secret novels that he would release quarterly during the year of 2023 on top of all the novels he had planned to work on during COVID. His largest series is the Stormlight Archive. However, new fans may not know that many of his fantasy titles are related under what he has named the Cosmere universe. Warbreaker is one such novel that belongs to that universe. It is currently the only novel of its series, with a planned sequel sometime in the future. If you can't tell, I'm a big Sanderson fan, but I would say that Warbreaker has been my favorite novel of his so far, and I don't think it is talked about as much as his Stormlight Archive titles. Warbreaker is a story of 2 sisters. The God King, one of the girls has to marry, sight unseen, a lesser god who does not like his job, and an immortal trying to undo mistakes he made hundreds of years ago. The gods are those who died in glory and returned, but are confined to live in the pantheon, away from all other people, and are sustained by the power of breath magic. Many things are not as they seem, and the world created in this story is so intriguing. This book also has probably the most beautiful and colorful magic system of Sanderson's creation. Please join me in anxiously awaiting the sequel, Nightblood, by reading and falling in love with this title.
Well, we hope you have added to your to be read list. We certainly added our own while the others were talking. So thank you for listening and happy reading.